Alright everyone, so One Piece chapter 1141 just came out, and I am more hyped than ever to see what Loki can do. I think everyone's been looking forward to Loki's release ever since, his introduction. But at this point, I think just the level of build-up that we're getting towards this character, and the fact that Oda's kind of assembling the full monster trio, Luffy, Zoro, and Sanji, to be there when Loki's released, I think we're in for basically the debut of one of the strongest characters that One Piece has ever seen. Now, we're going to talk about what we can kind of expect from Loki's release towards the end of this, but first, let me just say my favorite aspect of this chapter, and one of my favorite aspects of Elbaf in general, is just the fact that Oda is spending a lot of time in this arc to revisit classic Straw Hat dynamics and give us sort of doses of each of them. So, for example, the Elbaf arc began with a Nami and Usopp storyline. It was just a single chapter, but it played to their strengths as a duo, and Nami and Usopp is a dynamic that really was a classic dynamic in the early days of One Piece, because you've got the two most human, weakest, most cowardly characters who play off each other very, very well because they both understand each other very well, and they're both very often on the same wavelength. So that was a phenomenal opening chapter of Elbaf to just delve back into that duo. Similarly, right after that, we got a return of the East Blue Five. We got a full chapter or two dedicated to mainly the East Blue Five, and then Chopper thrown in a little bit later, kind of reminiscent of the early days of One Piece once again, so just revisiting old classic dynamics. Then recently we had the Romance Dawn trio, Luffy, Zoro, and Nami, on this quest for a key, again taking us back to those old days where we're getting to see this trio play to their strengths, the different characters bouncing off each other, giving them a little fun task to do that requires both Luffy and Zoro's strength, but Nami's navigation and exploration skills. And then this chapter, when they're leading up to the release of an extremely powerful warrior, of course you kind of want to see a Luffy and Zoro interaction. So this was one of my favorite Luffy and Zoro chapters in recent memory period. I think we'd have to go back to, maybe there was some chapter in Wano, I don't know, that was more fun as a Luffy Zoro chapter, but what I really enjoyed about this one is that we just got pretty much a full chapter of dialogue just between these two. And it was fun, entertaining dialogue because both Luffy and Zoro are very reckless, brash characters, but they come at things from different angles. Luffy is almost mindlessly reckless, whereas Zoro is very stoic and serious about the way that he approaches things. So we got to see two different types of kings basically bickering over the course of this chapter as to what to do next. And you can see the difference in terms of Luffy's approach versus Zoro's approach. I honestly really enjoyed seeing them have like a little bit of tension and arguments between each other, and it was never anything that serious. It was more so for comedy, but it did reflect how these two characters are both very similar to one another and very different. So I absolutely loved the whole Luffy and Zoro storyline right there. But first, it's the month of love, and we have the most romantic islands in One Piece available for you this February. This month, you can visit the Island of Women, or maybe Kamabaka Kingdom is more your speed, or the Nation of Romance Dressrosa, or the Island of Gorgeous Sakura Petals Drum Kingdom. Each poster is printed on matte paper, hand-cut by the artist himself, and you can get all four together for 50% off each poster. You can also still get the premium package if you want to appear on my streams, and in that case, you can also choose any poster from 2024 as well. So if you want Dressrosa, Amazon Lily, Drum Kingdom, and Kamabaka Kingdom for your walls, just hit the link in the description below. All posters from 2024 will also be available in the complete original set bundle. I am becoming more and more confident as the arc grows that this is going to be a storyline that is very, very heavy on Straw Hat character writing, just because Oda is actively revisiting so many of these classic dynamics, classic duos, classic trios, and the chapter ends with Luffy and Zoro having Sanji added to their group, so now we've got the full monster trio there, which is fitting as it would be the perfect setup to really have an impactful debut for Loki going up maybe against the monster trio in the next chapter. And even beyond that, even just the dynamics that Oda's revisiting over and over through the early chapters of Elbaf, we've also got setups for individual characters. So Robin obviously with Saul, but even this chapter with Franky and the Atom Tree, I like that there's a storyline that Oda's thought out for Franky right here. So already so much love being given to the classic One Piece characters, Robin getting something, Franky getting something, maybe even Chopper could get something with the fact that Yorl has the sword stuck in his head, and supposedly if it's drawn out, then he would die of blood loss. To me, that sounds like you would need an extraordinarily capable doctor to take care of that. And the most important thing to me is the fact that Usopp has yet to have his storyline established for the arc, because we know from build-up that Usopp is probably going to be the most important character in Elbaf, so the question then becomes, if Oda's already doing all this character writing for all the other Straw Hats, what is he saving for Usopp? To me, it's got to be something very, very significant. I would not be surprised if it's something somewhat related to Loki, because what's interesting is that the biggest thing that was embellished about Loki this chapter is the fact that he is a liar. He has told tales since childhood, he always lies, he always deceives. Usopp is maybe a much more lovable version of Loki, where Usopp's lies are usually not to cause harm to people or really hurt people, but at the end of the day, one of the first things you would think about when you think of Usopp is that he's a liar. One of the first things that the other giants used to describe Loki is that he's a liar. Where do these two meet, especially considering that Loki is a great warrior and Usopp aspires to be a great warrior? And finally, that does bring us to Loki. So, with Loki standing up at the end of the chapter, what's interesting to me is that Loki has one of his legs cuffed at the moment. However, we've seen in the past with storylines like Little Garden, with Zoro attempting to cut off his legs to free himself, and even with Kyros in Dressrosa, with Kyros in a similar situation, shackled and cutting off his leg to free himself to take on Doflamingo, we know that characters with extraordinarily strong wills will take such drastic actions in order to free themselves and fight. And from everything that we've heard about Loki, he would fit the bill there. I think maybe the only thing that would stop him from doing that is potentially the fact that he doesn't seem to have a cutting weapon, he instead has a hammer, which we will hopefully get to see debuted next chapter. But even still, maybe Loki could crush his foot in some sort of way to get it to slip out of the shackle, who knows. But even just considering the fact that Loki's own father once ripped off his own horns to show his conviction, I wonder if we're going to see some sort of act like that from Loki next chapter, because the thing about him is that so much has been built up as to what the consequences are going to be of releasing Loki, that we're almost guaranteed that we're going to get something really, really big and really, really impactful next chapter. There's just been too much build up to the idea of what happens when Loki is freed to not have something really, really impactful happen next chapter, so I'm definitely looking forward to next week. And finally, we have a voice of the people from my top tier of patrons. Dice said that, is it just me, or are the Strats acting more brazen than usual? Like, all of them are now on Luffy's level of not giving a damn. So I mean, you could say that, but what was interesting to me is that actually in this chapter, Zoro showed a bit more restraint, in that he was actually telling Luffy, hey, maybe we shouldn't let this guy loose, even though Zoro is normally one to be very okay with taking on a very strong opponent himself. So it is interesting that in some situations, even though Zoro is similarly reckless and bullheaded like Luffy, in some situations even he is basically like, Luffy, this may not be the smartest thing to do, we shouldn't walk into a fight just for the sake of walking into a potential fight. So I do like seeing that contrast between Luffy and Zoro. Lane Iwakura says, someone else pointed this out, but this is the first time Luffy and Zoro clash in a while, even if this was a light argument as far as it goes. There is definitely some kind of setup for Zoro this arc, alongside for Usopp finally, to do something rather drastic, perhaps even kill Loki, because he's been very ruthless ever since they disembarked on the island. So I do personally hope that Zoro does have some sort of new development in this arc. I would agree that it's definitely felt like Zoro has been a bit harsher ever since they left Egghead, with the comments that he had for Luffy after Vegapunk's death. And with this being a land of warriors, supposedly, that perfectly plays into Zoro's own journey as a warrior, and, you know, he has to get close to being able to take Mihawk very soon, so him having some sort of step or some sort of maturation here would be phenomenal. At the same time, I don't know if it would have anything to do with Zoro being too harsh or having to learn to curb his ways in any sense, just because that might just be the new way that Oda likes to write the character personality-wise, and it kind of has been the case ever since post-time skip. I do still believe that this is an arc that is set up to really change a lot of the Strats, or at least provide a lot of character development for them across the board, so I do expect something for Zoro here, but not necessarily something that will dramatically change the intrinsic nature of his character. I do think that there will be certain things that happen in terms of his opponents, and him learning how to get stronger that will be important for his journey to becoming the world's strongest swordsman, and maybe it affects his philosophy and outlook in some other ways. But with that, I really enjoyed this chapter, and it's really next chapter that's going to be the really hype and exciting one when we finally get to see what Loki can do. So I'm looking forward to chapter 1142, and with that, I will talk to you all next week.